If you don't have an Xbox yet, there's bad news and maybe a little good news. If you are thinking of walking into your favorite retailer, grabbing a next generation console off the shelf and putting it under your Christmas tree and you haven't pre-ordered yet, the news isn't great. At least on the Xbox side, we're getting a little bit more information. The CFO of the Xbox org did an interview with Seeking Alpha, and I'll include the link down below so you can jump over and take a look at that. It is definitely worth looking into if you care about this sort of stuff. But he is saying that they are not seeing the supply and demand curves crossing until at minimum about 4 months from now. Now, what exactly did I just say? Well, initially, when they build consoles, right, there's a bigger demand than there are the amount of consoles in the world, so the consoles sell out really, really quickly. But Microsoft can only produce so many consoles, and so the demand is outstripping the supply. Now, when they go to build this stuff out, they have to kind of look at the whole life cycle of the console, and while they try to build as many as they can up front, there's always challenges. For one, they have to get the supply lines up and running. Two, they have to make sure the yield is good. Yield meaning that the consoles coming off are actually good. And then they have to get them to the distributors. And all this stuff takes time, and it's really, really constricted up front. And then you drizzle onto that everything that is going on in the world, especially overseas initially, and then you slap around some logistical issues of supply chains just not operating as expected, and you come up with what has happened this holiday season, where there is a shortage of consoles. Now, this happens every single generation, but you might be saying, but Brad, with cell phones, we don't see those shortages anymore. Well, that's because they sell them every year, and we use Apple as an example. They sell a new iPhone in October and November every single year, so that they know roughly how many are going to be sold in October and November of every single year. When it comes to consoles, one, they're a bit more complex, and also they only come out about once every 7-ish years, something along lines like that, for a brand new generation. And so getting that supply and demand right is very, very challenging. And so what he is saying here is that he is not seeing that the supply is going to meet the demand for at earliest about 4 months, at maybe as long as 6 months. Somewhere in that timeline is when you will actually be able to walk into a retailer easily to get a console. That doesn't mean they're not going to ever show up again, but if you are wanting to get a console, you are going to need to be looking at your retailer's website very, very carefully, because they do come back in stock. It's not that they aren't ever going to show back up between now and then. It's just that it's going to be very, very difficult. I know that Walmart actually opened up orders again very quickly, and they sold out, no joke, within like 2 minutes or something like that. So you've got to be quick if you're going to want to get a console. And if you see an opportunity to buy one, absolutely do that, but don't buy one from eBay or Craigslist at an exuberant price, because that is just, you're fueling the fire. So what does that mean? It means that shortages are going to be lasting until somewhere at best around April of 2021 before it'll become easy to just go in and buy a console. Now, the rest of the interview wasn't just nothing. Like, there was actually a lot of good information in there about the business strategy of how Microsoft looks at acquisitions. And this is something we've talked about here quite a bit. And it just helps to reinforce the things that we have been talking about. First off, the gaming landscape has changed immensely. When he was referring to, or when the interviewee was talking about the Bethesda acquisition, which is, again, still not closed, but in the process. The gaming landscape has changed significantly from just a couple years ago. Previously, it was realistically just Microsoft, Sony, and Nintendo. If a content creator wanted to sell a game, they went to one of those outlets and pitched it, and hopefully they got some funding. Now it could be Microsoft, Sony, Nintendo, Google, Amazon, Tencent, Facebook, and there's probably some others that I am missing out on as well. And so the arena has changed, and Microsoft saw the opportunity to snatch up some very good IP, and they knew that they had to take the opportunity, because for somebody like Amazon or Google who wants to come in with a splash and really kind of build up their portfolio, they got to start buying some of these studios to lock up the IP, so at least it will be guaranteed to be on their platform. The other thing, too, that I've heard a couple times now from multiple interviews, including Phil Spencer and the CFO, is that they keep mentioning 100 million Game Pass subscribers. I suspect that is an internal metric. I mean, that's obviously a massive number for Game Pass, but I suspect that is the number that they are targeting and trying to figure out how to get there. And that is also fueling some of their acquisitions. And the other thing that they talked about too is, hey, if this truly is like a Netflix of gaming, which what a lot of people look at Game Pass in that manner, they need to have a pipeline of content. It doesn't mean you just shove things out whenever. There needs to be a strategic initiative to have content coming out at a very specific cadence so that people keep their subscriptions, because it's just as easy to sign up for Game Pass as it is to walk away from it. So Microsoft understands that, and he very much made it seem like they're still in the mode of looking for companies to acquire, but I think that's just Microsoft in general. They're always looking, if they find the right studio at the right price at the right time, they will absolutely snatch it up. It's not like Microsoft is hurting for money in this capacity. So it is a good interview, but just know that if you're looking for a console this fall and this holiday season, it's going to be tough. It really is, and that's to be expected. That is how it always happens. But the good news here is, and if you kind of read between the lines, he was saying that if it truly does last 6 months, that means it's going to be a blockbuster launch for Microsoft. If you think about it, the longer it takes for Microsoft to build up the supply to meet the demand, that means the more demand that they had, and just the better off the Xbox team is going to be doing selling all of these consoles. So overall, they sounded very optimistic, at least from a financial and sales perspective. Again, no numbers sold. There were no new numbers. We already know the Game Pass numbers around 15 million. They're not telling us how many consoles have been sold. We know that it was a blockbuster launch and at least 1 million in the first 24 hours. But that was sort of it through the highlights. It's worth a listen, I think, if you are into this kind of stuff. And so you should go check that out. But that's all you need to know for now.